Hey everybody, welcome back. Well, we made a postcard video. You guys liked it a lot. I appreciate that. We did get a lot of questions. And I've answered most of them, but because I feel like I just scratched the surface enough to give you guys the itch. So this is Beginner's Guide to Postcard, Part 2. All right, so first things first, disclaimers. First disclaimer, probably the most important one, is if you didn't watch Part 1, go watch Part 1. Because we're going to be talking about things that we already covered in Part 1, in Part 2, that you might just get confused on. So go watch Part 1. Here's a card. And then also I'll link it in the description of the video so that you can go watch Part 1. Then come back and watch Part 2. But don't not watch them. Just, do that first. Disclaimer number 2 is, and I said this in the last video, I am not an expert. I can give you enough knowledge to make you dangerous so that you can buy this stuff and source it and feel confident about you buying it. But I'm not the best source. There's better people, and I'll link their channels in the description below. If it's something you really want to get involved in, something you really, really, really love, check these people out too, because they're going to give you a much more deeper dive than I am. This is just going to get you to be able to be confident enough to go out, source this stuff, sell it, price it, so forth and so forth. So now that we got that out of the way, let's talk about some of your questions. One of the most common questions I got from that video was, how do you ship? I don't know anything about eBay standard envelope, and I don't know how to ship these things. You can't just throw them in a poly bag. No. You can't. And shipping them first class and priority would just be way too expensive and kill all your profit. So, how do you ship them? Well, it's pretty easy. You do use eBay standard envelope. And for those of you that don't remember from the last video, or maybe you didn't watch the last video and you're cheating, this is what it looks like. Get a little shameless plug in there for myself, as well as show you this is what the label looks like. It's essentially a stamped envelope with tracking. And the tracking's crap, so don't expect it to be very detailed. But this is what it looks like. And you just, peel it off, stick it on there, and you're done. Now, how do we ship them? Well, the first thing we do is we put them in a sleeve. This one's already in a sleeve. Here's a sleeve right there. A little plastic thing. Postcard goes in there. Kind of waterproofs it. Shows that you care. Big thing. Because you do want repeat customers when you're selling postcards. Repeat customers are going to be some of your best. So, taking care of them, worth it. These aren't that expensive. What are they? $4 or $5 a pack or something like that. For a pack of 100. I think they're around 4 or 5. It might be 6 or 7. I don't remember. We buy them in bulk, so I'm really not sure how much they are individually. There are a few people that the channels I linked in the description, they sell them on their Ko-Fi websites or their personal websites, as well as they do sell them on Amazon. You can buy them on Amazon or eBay. This is one brand. I think there's another brand that makes these. But this is the brand we buy. And they work really well for us. So highly recommend sleeving them. And then the next thing we do, we put it in this. It's an EcoSwift 6.5 by 4.5 rigid mailer. Available on Amazon. I'd put a link in the description below, but I don't know if that link will work in the future, because these are commonly on back order. These guys seem to be the only game in town when it comes to these kind of mailers. So if you just go to Amazon or eBay, they do sell them on eBay as well, and Google EcoSwift 6.5 by 4.5 rigid mailer, it'll come up. Google it. On the search feature, type that. And you can get them from EcoSwift directly. Are they much cheaper? No. They're not. One thing to note is that they don't, Amazon doesn't stock these very frequently. They do stock the lower quantities, so like 10 or 20 of these might be fulfilled by Amazon, so you can have them in a few days, but most of the time you're waiting 3 to 5 days for them to ship them out of their warehouse. So just note that when ordering these, if you're in a pinch, the only ones that are going to be prime, 1 or 2 day delivery is going to probably be these. And that's in our area. It could change in your area. I don't know. But we typically order them 100 to 200 at a time. Sometimes more, depending on, what sales were like and how many we need. But we have a lot of them over here, so we try to order as many as we can. So that's how we ship them. just like that. The next most common question we get is, how much do you pay for your postcards? Meaning, how much am I buying them for to sell, to resell? And the answer to the question has many layers. Basically what we look for, and then on top of that, what value would we put on them? What would we want to spend on these postcards to be able to sell them? And it's difficult to just tell you a number. And I will tell you the range in which we look to stay. And we typically want to stay between 5 and at the very most 20 cents. Will I go above that number? Absolutely, if it's rare and if it's something I know I can make a fair amount of money on. The majority of what we're going to talk about coming up is just going to be a concept. So meaning you could take the concepts I'm going to talk about and apply them to different categories or different content on the card, and you'll understand a lot of what I'm talking about in just a moment when we get into it. But as a rule, I don't typically go above that 20-cent marker. Most of the time I try to be around 8 cents, maybe, 10, I'll eke into the 10-cent range if they're really, really good or maybe very old cards. But the vast majority of the time I'm right around that 8 to 10 cent range. And it's just, it's safe for me because, if I do make a mistake and I buy a bunch of stuff, like recently I got a whole bunch of stuff that just didn't have any value. It was the same city over and over again with just the same cards over and over again. And they weren't valuable to begin with. And they were even less valuable if I listed a whole bunch of them. So, you do have to be mindful of what you're buying. Like, for example, Washington, D.C., Niagara Falls, San Francisco, California, all these very commonly, New York City, very commonly traveled places. That's going to drop my price per card down because number one, there's a lot of them in the marketplace. And number two, I don't really want to spend all that much money on cards that are just going to get buried because people are listing these constantly. A good example of that would be like Empire State Building in New York City. There's thousands of them, and there's thousands going on a day. So if I list one, if I don't sell it within the first 5 days, it's just going further down that list. So those are some of the things to keep in mind when purchasing cards and when going into that with the mindset of, I'm going to pay between 8 and 10 cents. Well, if there are a bunch of New York cities, that is going to come in lower. I'm looking at 3 to 4 cents a card at that point. Or if they are the larger cards, meaning the Continentals that we talked about last video, these are not worth that much money. Some of them can be very new. Some of them can have websites on the back. That's how new they are. They still make these today. So when looking at stuff like this, that I'm going down further. I'm down into that 3 to 4 cents range. I might not even take them. If there's a lot of foreign in there or something, I'll take them for free, but that's about it. So, there are reasons to not buy collections. And some of those reasons, unfortunately, are these larger ones. Is there value in the Continental? Sure, there are. They're slower sellers and they're not as valuable as some of the other ones, but yeah. There is some value. So, getting back to this whole concept thing that we talked about, the concepts that I'm going to try and impart on you here is, we talked about it in last video, that selling postcards is a numbers game. Meaning the more you list, the more you're going to sell. And it's a slow boat. Most of the time, you're not selling cards that you listed yesterday tomorrow. You're not selling postcards within an hour putting them up. And if you did, you might have undervalued it. A lot of the times you're buying these because people are going to eventually look for them and people are going to peruse your store and people are going to buy multiples off of them. So the concepts you need to employ are a little different. And what do I mean by that? Okay, so I'll give you an example. An example would be this card here. This is a large letter linen postcard. Linens, for the most part, are not really worth all that much money. They are, but they're on the lower end of the spectrum. So, for those of you that maybe forgot what a linen looks like, I have one here somewhere. Here we go. It's this thing. So it looks kind of like a comic book. It's hand-colored, black and white photo that was black and white that they colored, and they did kind of a crappy job of it. These are very common. Number one. And number two, there's not a lot of these that are rare or, worth a lot of money. Mainly because they were big sellers, but they weren't very common, and they didn't stick around for a while. Why? Well, because of the invention of color film and the ability to make things like this that came afterwards, that people found a lot more aesthetically pleasing. This is a theory, by the way, but it's my theory, and I'm sticking with it. I talked about it in the last video. I talked about it again. These were more popular than the linnets. Anyways, so that's kind of a concept you can apply when sourcing, is that, you see a lot of these, you might consider paying a little bit more than if you see a lot of these. So, another concept that we want to talk about is, content versus rarity. So, meaning sell-through rates. You take a look at your sell-through rates, meaning this card that I have, there's a lot of them in the marketplace, but are they actually selling? And that is very common in the postcard world. You will find a lot of churches. I don't have any churches here. I should have pulled a church, but I didn't. But churches are a great example. There's tons of church postcards out there, and the sell-through rate is garbage. Now, granted, there are those churches that are out there that maybe don't exist anymore, that burned down, that got remodeled, something of that effect. Or maybe it's in a small town, and there's just not a lot of them out there. Somewhere in upstate New York or middle of the state Pennsylvania, where it's this tiny little, 100 people congregation church that doesn't get a lot of attention, but somebody made a postcard about it, and that could up the value. And again, concept, you can apply that to other things. Military bases, things of that nature. So when you're outsourcing postcards, some of the things to look for are things like that. Sell-through rate. Another great example I can give you, and one that is very highly talked about, is things like hotels. This is a hotel in New York City. In fact, it's called Hotel Times Square. And chances are good this building is still there. Is it still Hotel Times Square? I don't know, because I don't go to New York City, nor did I take the moment to look that up. But it could still be there, could not be. It's probably irrelevant for a couple reasons. The first reason is that it's in New York City. Chances are good that this card is very common. Chances are also good that a lot of people had this card. Why? Well, hotels used to give these away. You would check into your room, you'd walk into your room, there'd be a writing desk there with a pen and some paper, and one of these. And you could take it with you if you wanted to, or you could leave it. Most people took it with them. And then what did they do with it? Well, they got home and said, hey, Mom and Dad, I stayed in New York City, and this is the hotel I stayed at. Or they decided, hey, I'm thinking of you, blah, 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 staying at this hotel, and mailed it across the country. It's good for a number of reasons. Number one, if I'm a hotel owner, I just got some free advertising. Number two, I get a little souvenir, and I think about this when I come back. That was nice. They gave me a little souvenir, so forth, so forth. It's great for that. Bad for resale value. Why? Well, there's a lot of them in the marketplace, and a lot of them are unposted. So nobody mailed these. They just took them home as a souvenir. So that what that means is that this card is not rare. Do hotels sell? Yes, they do. And they sell well. Certain types of hotels will sell better than others. A lot of like old motor lodges and things of that nature. Interior shots of hotel rooms, especially from like the early 60s and 50s. For whatever reason, if the television's on, that ups the value. I still don't know exactly why that's a thing, but it is. If the TV's on, you can add a buck or two to your value. Why? I couldn't tell you. You can't see what's on the television, but it's on, so it's worth a little extra money. The multi-view ones, meaning that the card has 4 different photos on it. Maybe one of the interior, maybe one of the pool, maybe one of the front of the building, maybe one of the parking lot. Those do have some value to them. Now, again, same concept applies. Chances are good Best Western or Jim's Motor Lodge gave these away for free. Once again, free advertising and a little souvenir to take home to you. You probably took it home and went, Mom and Dad, look where I stayed. So there is an abundance out there. However, the sell-through rate of those is higher. People buy more hotel photographs than they would, say, this monument. Or say this one here, where it's just a car on a road in Rochester, New York. A drive around Cobb's Hill in Rochester, New York. Valuable? Not really. It's probably a $4 card. In fact, I know it's a $4 card because I just looked it up. But, things like this are more commonly rare than things like hotel rooms. and because of that reason. Another company that did stuff like that are people like United. This is a plane. It's an old plane, a DC-8 jetliner from United. This is a United issued postcard, meaning United logo is right there on it. Chances are good, if you were on this flight or on a plane like this, you got this postcard. It was probably sitting right in the seat pocket in front of you, and you could just take it with you and say, Mom and Dad, this is a plane I flew on to New York, or whatever. Again, valuable, yes. People collect them, yes. Is there a lot out there? Yes. Sell-through rate's high, but there's also a lot out there. So the concept here is that you're looking for cards that, are common, but maybe not as common. That way, you would sell them a little faster. If there was a bunch of these in a collection, would I not buy them? No, I would absolutely buy something like this. My price per card would go down because I know that there's a lot of these in the marketplaces. Museums did these too, where they had, they featured different planes and so forth. So they printed off a lot of these. So, things like this can have value, but it also can be, pretty common. So, a concept to apply. You can apply this same concept to things like Pikes Peak or San Francisco, California. The Golden Gate Bridge is a good example of that. There's tons of postcards of the Golden Gate Bridge out there. And your sell-through rate might be somewhat high, but there's also a lot in the market. All right, I'll give you the reverse version of that concept. This one. This is Hotel Marie Antoinette in New York City. Now, being a postcard seller, there's a couple things that are not going well for this card immediately. The first of which is condition is not great. There is some bending and so forth, which most postcard most postcard buyers don't care that much about it as long as the image is clear and things are, not all that damaged. There's no rips, so forth, chunks missing out of the card. However, it's a hotel. And it's in New York City. This card, however, is old. This is from 1914. Well, it was postmarked in 1914, so it was made earlier than that. And it's in New York City, just like the other hotel, the Hotel Times Square that we talked about earlier, also in New York City. However, this one is worth a lot more. There's one listed on eBay, and that person is asking $12.75 for it. However, there are no solds. There's a lot of hotels that do sell, that have sold. This may have been renamed as well. However, this is significantly more valuable than the other one. The sell-through rate, however, is extremely low. So, things like this, worth certainly the money, and definitely worth listing. And I haven't listed this card yet, it was actually in a stack of things that I was ready to list today. If I listed this card, I would probably list this card right around $9 or $10. Cheaper than the one that is listed now, but certainly not a valueless card. $9 or $10 for a postcard is awesome, considering that I have about 4 cents into this card. I did, however, run over and pull a church for you guys just to give you an idea of something that looks valuable. That is not. Here we go. This is St. John the Divine in New York City as well. Getting kind of a feel for New York City is not the greatest. But, it's all relative. But this was postmarked in 1914. So old card and a church. I have listed probably about 50 of this particular church in different postcards. And it's very common. There's a lot of these out there. And churches don't have a great sell-through rate. These will sell if you catch the right person at the right time. But again, same concept of the Empire State Building applies to this card. There's going to be more listed, and yours is going to get further and further down the list. So just something to keep in mind when you're buying postcards is that your sell-through rate is important. And it directly affects what you're paying for the cards, which is why when people ask me the question, what do I try to pay for postcards? I say there's many layers to it, and there are certain things to look for before I decide exactly what I'm paying. But if you want a general rule is between 5 and 15 cents you're probably going to be safe. You could push it to 20 and you still probably will be safe, but between 5 and 20 cents, in that range, chances are good you're going to be all right. Unless it's a massive collection where you're going to end up putting up a lot of capital, if you're buying 50, 100, 200, 500,000 cards at that price range, even if you make a total mistake and it's just completely a waste of money, you're still not out that much money. So you should be all right. A couple of things we're gonna impart upon you before we get out of here. Just a couple things that people have asked me. Real photo postcards, are they valuable? Yes, they are. Here's one right here. This one, however, is not that valuable. Real photo postcards, for the most part, are valuable. And most of them are one of a kind or rare, meaning there's only a couple of them. This one is one of the ones that's not. This is more of a mass produced. Now, it's not lithograph printed. This is a real photo. It actually says it on the back, actual photo. However, it is of New York City and it is of the Empire State Building, which makes it significantly less value because there's tons of postcards with the Empire State Building on it. This one, however, is rarer. Not rare, but rarer. And I hate using the word rare, but I'm going to this time. This postcard was, this person bought this image, or they took this photograph and then developed it many times onto this postcard to make it a real photo. There's probably a couple hundred of these in existence, and there's not that many of them on eBay. So is it worth more than your normal Empire State Building photo? Yes, it is. Is it worth as much as some other real photo postcards? No. Most real photo postcards almost have an unlimited ceiling, depending on what the content is. If you find some insanely crazy, weird, or just insanely rare content on a real photo, it can be worth hundreds of dollars. These, however, are not. So just keep that in mind when looking at real photo postcards. People may advertise that they are real photos and that they are, valuable, which they are, but some of them can be mass produced to an extent and drop the value, like things like this. So, another concept. The other concept I'm going to impart upon you before we get out of here is don't prejudge your cards. I mean, we just kind of talked about prejudging things, but when you're listing them, you will get into this flow, where you're just listing and you have certain prices set for certain types of cards and you kind of just go through it but you get an idea of concepts and you get an idea of what kind of cards you're listing. And then sometimes it's really easy to just say, that's just a picture of a house. It couldn't possibly be worth all that much money. And I'd say 70% of the time you might be right. And then there's times where you're wrong. And this is one of those times. This is a picture of a house. It's a chrome postcard, so probably 60s, 70s. It's Seton Shrine Center in Emmitsburg, Maryland, the second home of St. Elizabeth Ann Seton. I don't know who she is. I'm imagining she had something to do with Seton Hall, but that's about as much as I know. But this was her house. They called it the White House. Good name. This, I would think, would be a $1.50 card. Something that nobody would really care about. We'd probably just throw this in with an ephemera lot or take it to the flea market or whatever you do with your excess cards that you don't want to list on eBay. This is not that type of card. This card happens to be worth about $7, oddly enough. I have it listed for $6.25 because I want to be the cheapest, but this card in particular would be one that people would look at and think that content's garbage. It's just a house. It's probably not worth that much money. And you'd be wrong. It's worth about $7. So, some things to consider. Don't prejudge your cards. Try and look them up. At least put them into a search in eBay. Take a look at what they're selling for. And take a look at what people are asking for them. Postcards is one of the few things where what people are asking may differ from what solds are. And that's something that I do want to talk to you about before we get out of here. Your sold comps on postcards can be very skewed. Why? Well, there's a lot of old school postcard sellers out there, and there's also a lot of people that are very lazy, which we talked about earlier, that just throw cards up for the same amount of money. A lot of those you're just going to want to ignore because, number one, they're probably auctions that someone put them up there starting at 50 cents, and then if they got 75 cents, they were happy for it. I don't know how these people make money doing that, but people do it. So what I do is I get rid of auctions. I just look at buy it nows. And then check from there. Again, you're still running into the people that just throw postcards up there for $1.50. Just ignore them and look at the ones that actually were buy it nows for a certain amount of money. And that will give you a pretty good idea of what your card will sell for. Now, when using the other side of this, which is what people are asking, which I do frequently, at times, cards become rarer. So there may be 3 or 4 sold for around $5 or $6, but there may be 4 on there. Let's back up. Let's say the sell-through rate's relatively good. And some of them sold for $12, some of them sold for $4, some of them sold for $6. And then you go back and you take a look at what people are asking. And let's say everybody's asking $29.99 and $16 and $15 and $19. And you would be the lowest if you listed yours for $17. Well, none of them have sold for $17. So you do want to take that into consideration. But let's say you list it for $12. Now you're significantly cheaper than everybody else, and you're falling in line with what the sales are on them. So you do want to also look. It's one of the few things that you do want to take a peek at what people are selling. Granted, you will see this frequently where we'll go back to the house. One jerk is listing this for $39.99, and the rest of the people are listing it for $7. The guy that's $39.99 is probably relying on people not looking anywhere else and hoping that somebody just comes by and buys this for $39. I probably shouldn't have called him a jerk, but it does irritate me whenever I get a card and I go to look at it and all of a sudden there's one listed for $30 and then I go look at sold comps and they're sold for $5. I understand the concept behind it. I understand you're trying to catch people sleeping and not shopping around, but it kind of skews it a little. But that does happen, and you do want to take a peek at what people are asking for these cards. It does help with your research. And a lot of the times, things change. Maybe this building recently got torn down, and the sold comps were from when the building was still in existence. Now that it's torn down, maybe it's worth a little bit more money. There's a bunch of reasons that this card could go up in value. So you do want to be mindful of what people are asking for them, just in case the card went up in value. So, something to take a look at. That's going to wrap it up here. I know it's a lot of information, and I know these videos are long, but I really appreciate you guys sticking with me. If you do like this video, I'd appreciate you hitting the thumbs up. And if you could, subscribe to the channel too. It's free. Doesn't cost you a penny. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Good day, sir!